Okay, the last presentation of this session before we go to the round table. This is more or less, it's similar to what I said last year. It's talking about a little bit about the similarities between China as a microcosm of paleontology and the pressures that we face more generally. I would have to warn you now to start that I'm not the innocent academic abroad that's related to by the title. So, this starts in Yunnan at the Kunming Laboratory of Paleobiology, and basically I went to work there about 4 years ago, and when you can see the Yunnan province, that's where it is in China. And I went there because I was invited to work on some of the dinosaur materials that was there. One thing that's important to understand is that within China, it's a highly competitive system in terms of publication. This is something that's come up already today. So, for example, within China itself, they don't count any publications within the scientific department unless the journal is SCI listed. They don't count them unless the member of the department is first author or corresponding author, otherwise they don't exist. And really they put a priority, and in fact it was written into my contract, to actually publish in Science and Nature, which is rather extreme. Just to give you an idea of how they try and achieve this, because they're obviously trying to catch up a little bit scientifically. In my university, there was a budget of 3 million yuan, which is about, well, it was £300,000, but after the last month, probably about £3 million in equivalent now. About 450,000 US dollars. And what they do is at the end of the academic year, they disperse that sum across the scientific departments according to what is being published. The exception to this is if you have published in something like Science or Nature, in which case you get a flat fee of over £30,000. That's not for your department or for research, it's for you to buy what you want, urinate up against the wall, whatever you want to do. So basically it's entirely for your personal indulgence, and it's a way of massively increasing your salary for your personal consumption. So that's a way that they've incentivized publications over there. And perhaps one indication of one of the fallouts of that was in this editorial in April last year in The Lancet, where they talked about 42 papers being retracted from Chinese authors by Biomed Central in a single week in March last year. And the analysis demonstrated there had been systematic manipulation of the peer review process by third-party agencies. And this seemed to be organized because it was across a series of respected institutes in Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, and Chengdu. And therefore, the conclusions that they made was that in fact there was a systematic corruption taking place of the country's research culture, and this is largely due to the financial benefits and obviously the lifestyle changes that can result from that. So this is the sort of problem that we have working within this environment in China, and it's a lot more widespread than that. At this point, I'd like to go a flashback to where my career briefly overlapped with Paul Barrett. Like myself, he was briefly editor for the Dinosaur Society journal, and one of our responsibilities was to do the junior dinosaur journal called Dynamite. And as you'll find out later on, this actually had an interesting consequence for the work out in China. So basically, I was going to work in the early Jurassic dinosaur mountain scenario, and when I went out there the first time, I found material indicating remains, embryonic remains, and eggshell remains within about 20 minutes of arriving in the field. At this point, my department got very excited, and they said, it's fine, you actually have exclusive access. Nobody else has permission to work in this area. So you can come out here. So once I guaranteed I could continue to work on fish, they said, yeah, okay, really grudgingly, yes, but don't mention it on any grant applications. Then basically I moved out there to start working at the same locality. The rather bizarre twist was that within 3 weeks of having done my test prospecting there just before moving out there, I attended a conference where I saw some identical material being, or near identical material being presented from the same locality. And when I checked up with the authorities, there was it became clear that this was material that had left the country without permission, and it was continuing to leave the country. And this is where we come to dynamite. Now, some of the names will have to be withheld to protect the innocent, of course. But for the sake of argument, we'll refer to one of the participants, if you get the Blackadder reference, as Bob. So, in this environment, one side alerted the presenter of this material that there was a conflict and actually this might not actually have legally left the country or with any permission. The inevitable happened, and this went back to a senior author in North America. And so within a very short space of time, I actually received an email communication from this author, which was asking exactly what was going on, understandably. So the nature of that was in this form. It referred that there was a series of issues, and he'd been working in collaboration with a person called Timothy Wang or Huang Dai. This is the really bizarre part where it comes into dynamite, believe it or not. Because what became evident was that I actually knew Huang Dai from 15 years earlier. He'd sent me, as editor in Dynamite, an account of a trip from his Taiwan Rockhounds Museum, taking a group of 40 kids to a dinosaur mountain locality. And it was all very happy, and we all went there for Taiwan. We went there, we gathered fossils, we went back again. And apparently he'd basically done exactly the same in 2003, and that's when the first material started leaving without any permits. So one of the things that came up over the ensuing dialogue was that there was a very heavy reliance on Huang Dai for translation purposes. And, it's like, I don't know the ins and outs of the system in China. And one of the things that I pointed out was that there was the agreement that he felt had been signed that therefore gave him permission wasn't actually an agreement to do the work at all. It was basically the equivalent of a sort of an agreement in principle to work if they got permission, because no activities, whether prospecting or excavating, let alone exporting, can possibly take place without a land and resources permit. And what I did was I checked up and I found that there was this initial agreement that had been signed by all the parties, and Huang Dai in particular had actually composed this agreement. He was also one of the parties in the agreement. He provided the translations for all the parties of all the agreements, and it was a joint one that had been signed. Now, what had happened was, after this had been signed, it had gone to Land and Resources, and it had been rejected. And this was sent out to Huang Dai to notify the other people involved that the project had been cancelled and that it couldn't take place. So this notification apparently had been sent out, but the other researcher had not been notified that this was the case. And after my results and analysis, I got back to him and indicated that, you know, what he'd done effectively was filled in an application for National Geographic. That doesn't mean you've got a grant from National Geographic just because you filled in an application form. And that was the big difference in terms of whether it was permissible or not for the material to leave. So I sort of reiterated that I was acting effectively, bizarrely though it seems, as a representative of a Chinese state organization saying that this was a problem. And he responded, I choose to believe my colleague. And that could be some sort of, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, you know, you have to trust the people that you work with. You know, there's one side where it's like, it's a great way to avoid taking responsibility for your actions, for example. But I had to fundamentally point out that the person is the sole translator for the meeting, sole point of contact, drew up the agreement, is a co-author, and yet appeared not to have passed on the information the project was not approved, and this was therefore a problem. And if last month has taught us anything, then you can believe who you want, but it's always worthwhile to try and check the facts, otherwise you can end up in quite a bad situation. So, as a result of this, I was actually engaged with the revision of the ethics statement in a very peripheral fashion for SVP. And at that point, we were talking about the member bylaws, and I managed to get the statement changed so to make clear that the permits had to be obtained for collection and export of the materials, and just to make it quite clear that all appropriate stages have been followed. And this comes into the reason why I wanted Nicola to speak earlier, because the next stage that happened was that there was a paper was submitted to Nature, and one of the referees knew of my work in China, so he approached me and said, "Is this material all right?" And I explained the situation, and the referee wrote back the concerns, and the next thing that the referee knew was the paper had been approved anyway, which goes back very much to what Paul was saying earlier in terms of that sense that, you know, yeah, but the science is kind of sexy, so let's just do it anyway. And I think that, you know, there's a responsibility for publishers, and, you know, it's good that PLOS ONE and others are actually taking that on board in terms of not becoming outlets for this sort of information, which can be tainted if it's not been done properly. And, of course, there was no documentation asked for or available for this. And one of the other things that made this situation simpler was that the paper, when it was eventually published, from the graphics, it matched up really nicely with the publication done by Wang Dai, in which he talked quite openly about the fact that he'd taken the material out of the country without permits repeatedly over the years. And you could match up the graphics quite nicely to make it clear that it was the same specimens. The last words that I really had over the matter was the other author was continually coming back to the amount of money that had been involved, and this was a really real concern to start with. This is tied into a major grant I've submitted. I've invested more than $30,000 from my own research. And you have to always remember that when we're dealing with this, all of this is a dance between money, science, and politics. And as soon as money becomes involved, then corners start being cut, especially with the increasing pressure that we're under academic departments in order to produce this sort of high impact factor material. Last year I ended this talk with this slide, which perhaps is a little bit more prophetic than I was realizing, given the events of last month. But those issues are going to continue. Fossils as products of money will never be limited by laws. As long as fossils are a market value, they will move over borders. And perhaps bringing it back to the human cost, why carry a rifle, bribe officials, and take a big cut if there is no law to be avoided? We do need regulation of this, and we need it to be done by something that's informed by paleontologists rather than politicians or, heaven forbid, archaeologists. I think perhaps that's one thing that's come out quite clearly today. So in conclusion, as we've come back to again and again right from the start of John's presentation, bad legislation can be ineffective because of wording and who does it. This means bad legislation can often do little except inhibit scientific research. If I get applauded by Dave Martell after saying that, then I'm in trouble for my career, I suspect. The Chinese situation is not a little local problem, which was an attitude that I came up against a few times. The pressures that they're under that generate this sort of issue is actually a global situation. And perhaps in a negative view, one might suggest that China's structure may well prove to be an indication of the shape of things to come for the rest of us. Comes back to what I said at the start. We have common resource pressures, money, drive for publications, problems of bad legislation, responsibility shared by publishers. Once again, it seems quite nicely symmetrical that we're talking about this, going back to the first poster boy of Vert Paleo, which also became the first poster boy of illegal repatriation during wartime spoils. So, I'd like to thank all the people who responded to my arm twisting in order to participate in this symposium. And I guess we now move on to the round table discussion at the risk of unleashing wildfire. But I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and coming along today. Anyway, I think it's been very interesting. Thank you.